David Fowley, you presented me a very unique opportunity, the chance to discuss a new film and a very old film, neither of which I'd seen. The new film is called Being Maria, which is currently on demand and recently out on Blu-ray, courtesy of Kino Lorber. This is actually your disc, which I have borrowed. I know, right? But I exchanged my copy of Last Tango in Paris
I should go get
with
that,
you.
pull that up.
Oh, well, yeah, there you go. But no, it's okay. So, yeah, I had not seen either film. Was this the first time for you for both of these as well?
I've seen parts of Last Tango in Paris, but never like sitting through the whole thing.
Wait, is this one of those situations where I've seen parts of Last Tango many, many times?
No, no. Yeah, it was just the apartment scenes, but not anything too risque. But of
Right.
course, I'm sure I could speak for you in saying that both of us have heard a lot about Last Tango in Paris over the years.
It's weird. I'd heard the name before, but I was unaware of the controversy or the controversial butter scene until like the last 10 years. I don't know. I found out about I'm like, "Oh, that's why people talk about this film."
Yeah.
Interesting. But Being Maria is a new movie about it's sort of about the making of Last Tango in Paris, but mostly about Maria Schneider, who was the co-star of that film, who, because of its kind of graphic and controversial nature and the stories that came out about the making of that film, kind of had a rocky career and drug use and all sorts of unfortunate business afterwards that she didn't quite recover from, at least as far as the movie tells it. Now, we'll get into all of this, but my impression watching Being Maria was it felt like I was watching the dramatization of a Wikipedia article, but then I went and I read some Wikipedia articles and some IMDb trivia, and I was like, where was all of this in the
Mhm.
movie? Because
Yeah.
there's some amazing stuff that isn't even mentioned in this dramatization. So I want to get into that, and also we can touch on Last Tango in Paris. Probably a poor choice of words, but let's actually start there. What is Last Tango in Paris, and why are people still talking about it decades later, David?
What is it? Um, it's a film. Yeah, so I oddly it's directed by well, not oddly, but it's a an Italian film set in Paris. Um, the story's set in Paris, and it's basically Marlon Brando, and he took on this role right after Don Corleone, The Godfather, and so it came out the same year as The Godfather, 1972. Um, Two totally different roles. He plays a kind of a former actor, journalist, and recent American widower named Paul, and he his wife basically ran kind of like a halfway house or brothel or
Flop house.
flop house. There we go,
Yes.
flop house. And so one day he um, meets Jeanne, played by Maria Schneider, and she is old enough to be his daughter. He's in his late 40s, or in the movie he's 45. Brando, I think, was 48 or 49 when he filmed the role, and
Which
that
is disturbing because that's about the same age I am now.
yeah,
And just a brief note about aging. A few weeks ago, Katie Glidewell and I talked about the movie Clueless, and in that film, Wallace Shawn's character, the teacher, he's 47, and I'm like, wait a second, I'm
and Paul
never
Rudd
mind.
is ageless, and he was in that movie. Um,
Seriously,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
so that's how old he is. And when Maria Schneider shot this, she was 19. In her character is supposed to be around that age, in well, maybe early 20s, and Jean is fit to be betrothed to a filmmaker um, who is kind of like, yeah. So let me just continue. I'll come back to him in a moment. So they made it this apartment. It's an apartment that's for sale, for rent, And when she goes to check it out, she sees that he's already in the apartment, and he's basically doing the same thing, checking it out. They have this just odd and kind of awkward, engaging scene where they just, well, basically, he rapes her, and I
Well,
mean, you could call it rape, or you could call it just like they have consensual sex, but
I wouldn't call it rape.
okay,
That happens later.
yeah,
Because there's not an indication that she, at least from what I recall, I mean, I watched this like a week and a half
giving
ago.
up a fight. Yeah, all right.
Right. It's awkward. It's an awkward first encounter. I think you used the word awkward, and that's
Yeah,
very fitting.
yeah,
But
odd and awkward, like stranger sex. Um,
right,
yeah,
because, and the reason I'm hesitating to call it, the R word, is because this is the catalyst for their relationship for the entire film,
right.
which is 3 kind of steamy days of getting away from their outside lives and hooking up with each other and doing various strange things in this hotel that they've
And it's an
rented.
interesting concept that he proposes, is that we're going to meet here for the next 3 days or whatever. I don't know if he even says 3 days, but it becomes 3 days. We're going to meet here, and everything about the outside world is going to be gone. They have very minimal furnishings. They don't really care too much about bedding. And they just basically are there to, you know, her mainly walk around, almost naked. And then for them to have basically sex, or just have a physical relationship without any emotional connection.
Yeah.
And
No
any,
names. Like
yeah, no names,
they
no
want to know
names.
anything about each other.
Yep. And nothing. And um, it's kind of like this experiment that he proposes, but also she just, I guess, for whatever reason, she agrees to. Um, so interesting. I mean, the movie's directed by Bernardo Bertolucci. He had previously done The Conformist, and the it's an interesting concept for a story in a film, because basically you have these two characters, um, and these two actors performing these characters one way in the apartment, and then their outside world, which we do see them outside of the apartment. They're kind of behaving somewhat differently, um, because they're not seeing each other outside the apartment. They are engaging with other people, so it's a little different. Um, we see Jeanne hanging out in her mother's nearby apartment. Her mother's husband had died, and they're going through her stuff and they're his stuff, and they're just talking about you know life and moving on, and then at the same time, she's also, like I said, um, she's engaged. She's set to be married. And whenever she does see her fiance, he's filming her,
With
uh,
with a full crew. Yeah.
with a full crew, mostly like very verite, but also mostly like without her consent. Like, oh, you're filming me, um, and she gets to the point where she starts to think like, are you filming me for me, or are you filming me for your film? Are you filming me because you're in love with me, or is this for your film? And the film will eventually culminate in their wedding. It'll and when we see Paul outside of the apartment, he is basically dealing with the aftermath of his wife's recent suicide. It's a little sketchy as to why she committed suicide. We see him interact with her mother, who comes into town to take care of her things, and just try and figure out like why this happened. Um, and I guess outside of the apartment, one of the famous like Brando scenes is a scene where he sits next to the open casket of his wife, who's like all, kind of made up with makeup and fake eyelashes and lipstick, and he basically has this kind of, vulnerable and touching monologue, basically talking to her about her. And so, like, the movie, I don't know if you want to spoil a 53-year-old movie, but the movie in the end, it gets, you might think that there's some awkward and weird things going on already, but the third act really kind of, I wouldn't say goes off the rails, but it definitely ramps up the, I guess, just the line between, like, stalkerish perversity and or just not knowing when to draw the line and break off. Yeah, so, and there's some, definitely some Brandoisms kind of all over the place, but
Well, I think it's weird because they in that third act that you mentioned, they kind of take the relationship outside. They
yeah,
don't take it public, but they take it outside to a famous, tango contest, and they end up basically just destroying the entire good time of everyone else who's there. And it's there that they kind of realized, yeah, we're crazy. This doesn't work outside of the apartment, and kind of neither do we. So, what are we even doing here?
yeah,
And I think, yeah, it's a fascinating conceit. It would have been interesting to see a version of this film where it's not explicitly just a sexual relationship, but people kind of, almost like therapy, like being able to express yourself, with a complete stranger in a way that you can't, with the people in your lives, and how
right,
does that all work? Because there's so many weird dangling story threads and unanswered questions here that, these lives are incomplete. um, I think the most fascinating stuff happens outside of that hotel room. For example, well, first of all, that scene with the dead wife in the bed, that's in an apartment
hmm,
in the apartment building. We've got this 3 or 4, 5 day old corpse, whatever it is, just kind of like sitting there all made up. And yeah, I don't know how that was allowed or what the planning was there. Um, if this is some sort of a local, like, Italian ritual, I have no idea, or French ritual, I should say. But yeah, it's very bonkers. It almost feels like, is Paul imagining this? But I guess it's really going on. And the other thing is, speaking of surreal, Paul goes to talk to one of the other tenants in the building, and it turns out is the man with whom his wife had been carrying on a years long affair. And part of that affair, talk about like specific kinks, is that her lover was, I don't know if which direction this went, if she insisted that the lover be based on Paul, or that Paul be based on the lover, but essentially she insisted that they wear the same clothes down to the bathrobe, they have the same kind of affectations, and drink the same things. It's a very strange scene, and they don't seem to have, real animosity. They know of each other, but they kind of tried to pretend that they didn't. It's very odd. Um, and we have to kind of talk about the butter scene.
mm, yeah,
At one point, uh, they have Maria and Paul have an encounter where
in the
she,
apartment, yeah,
yeah, in the apartment, he's kind of lounging around on the floor. She walks in and sets down a boombox or whatever, and he says, "Go get the butter," and she does, and he proceeds to force himself on her on the floor and doing things with the butter that, I can't really talk about here. And it was not consensual, and it turns out that it was not, in the filming of that scene, which we'll discuss in the making of Being Maria. Bertolucci and Brando had talked about, well, we're going to push this scene a little further than what is in the script, but we're not going to tell Maria Schneider. And so it was an attack, and it wasn't specifically, what you would classically think of as sexual assault, or rape, I guess, but it was a sexual assault. And she has kind of talked about that, or she did. She's passed away, several years ago, but she had talked about the experience of that, and the surprise and the hurt, and the fact that nobody consoled her or apologized after that scene. In fact, Bertolucci, from what Being Maria tells us, kind of talked to her about it afterwards and said, I don't believe in actors, just characters, and getting the truth of the scene. So, I don't think he even said, I'm sorry you feel that way. It's just like, this is what, you're in for, and we're going back to shoot again in 5 minutes. So
Right.
get yourself together.
And I think Brando said something like, it's only a movie,
Yeah. But so that, and it should be noted that, and again, I watched this a little bit ago, and now I've watched Being Maria, so I'm a little bit fuzzy as far as like the reality versus the which fiction is which, because there are differences between the two in terms of the portrayal of that scene specifically, which I want to talk about.
Yeah,
but that happens later in the movie, but it's not the end of their relationship. They still carry on, and there is like later there is an aftermath of that scene where they're just kind of like, they don't really acknowledge it. They're just kind of like talking and hanging out again. Yeah. And it's very, very bizarre.
Yeah.
So here's my thing about Last Tango in Paris, because I want to spend most of this time. I want to lay the groundwork as far as the movie that is the movie that we're discussing that is based on. Afterwards, it was one of those things where I guess I felt like you had to be there, because we've seen so many in the last, 50 years or whatever it's been since this movie came out, kind of erotic, steamy thrillers. I mean, this might have been the origin for every Skinemax movie ever launched, but watching it now, it's not sexy, it's not hot, it's just a couple of damaged people in a film that I don't think is very well put together. And maybe that's just by modern standards. It feels very loose and kind of sloppy, and maybe that's kind of the point. Maybe Bertolucci was going for this sloppiness, this verite of everyday life and messy relationships. But coming out of it, I'm like, well, these characters, there's nothing to them. They're self-destructive, and they have a lot of sex, and I haven't been given, in the 90 minutes I've been watching or whatever it is, any reason to care, or anything that is supposed to say about my life or the human condition or anything like that. Now, reading Pauline Kael's review, which you helpfully linked me to, she had some very interesting things to say. She was extremely high on this movie, and it's interesting because
Ebert,
I did not read Ebert's review of it, but Pauline Kael, a couple of great quotes in here. She described the film as realism with the terror of actual experience still alive on the screen, and at a more complex level, he, meaning Brando, helps Bertolucci discover the movie in the process of shooting it, and that's what makes movie making an art. So, again, our victim, Maria Schneider, is even, the critics. Now, there was a lot of outrage when this movie came out. It was censored and banned in Italy, and all the prints were destroyed. Famously, Bertolucci and Brando had to flee. And we already kind of touched on the repercussions for Maria Schneider, but there got a lot of people upset, except for some of the film's defenders at the time. Now, I don't know if the stories about Schneider's situation during that scene and some of the other abuse she suffered during the making of the movie were publicly known, but it is rather chilling to see these people defending it, like from the Bertolucci perspective of, it doesn't really matter what you do to make this story. You got to make the story and make it as real as possible. Like, yeah, but where does that end? And that's kind of sick.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of sick, and looking at it from a 2025 lens, it's definitely it's I hear what you're saying. Like, we've seen a whole lot of, like, gosh, I mean, what's that director, Gaspar Noé, or
Oh yeah.
We've seen his movies. We've seen, I mean, gosh, Lars Van Trier or whatever. It's like we've seen some intense stuff as far as sexually speaking.
Mickey Rourke's entire filmography up to The Wrestler.
I don't know about Harley Davidson, Marlboro Man, but
that was the director's cut. Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess when I think about 1972 and something like this coming out, and the fact that Marlon Brando's in it, who was pretty much considered the greatest actor of all time, then and probably still now. It was definitely, I could see how it was definitely a shock.
Yeah.
For it to, come out like that, and for it to be a controversy in Europe too before it hit America, that's a huge thing. And so the word of mouth there was like, uh-oh. And I think like you could probably consider it to be like the beginning of like maybe like indie art films in a way. As far as like mainstream introduction to like indie art films, it did kick off, a lot more. Or let me back up. I think a lot of people had in mind that this was going to like kick off like a movement, like, oh, we're going to see more of these kinds of movies. Well, it kind of backfired because of all the controversy, and because of not just the way it was received, but the controversy of the filmmaking and everything. Now, aesthetically, as a film, I think it's beautifully made. I know that Bertolucci based the story. I think he co-wrote it. I was looking at Wikipedia, and Agnes Varda had something to do with some of the dialogue, and I was like, okay.
Hopefully it wasn't during the butter scene.
I know, right? Yeah, so yeah, I know that back then, this was a huge shock for people, and it became a lot more. I think the fact that it came out the same year as Godfather, it became something even huger than anticipated, because it was like, wow.
Well, I could also see that the fact that Brando was playing 45 in this movie and like what 65 or 70 in The Godfather,
Right.
like this weird time
Right.
jump.
Right, exactly. So I think like if anybody other than now, Brando's performance, I think, is good. Not great, good. A lot of people think it's like a masterpiece, but if this movie was cast with anybody like else, I don't know if we'd be talking about it so much. And I think it might be a totally different movie.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because I'm wondering if another actor would have agreed to go along with what Bertolucci had wanted in terms of that scene.
Yeah.
Because Brando was very much open to it and kind of aloof. Someone else might have said, "Look, we got to at least tell her about this, right? I know you want to get a real moment, but this is assault. This is something." Now, I'm projecting 2025 back to 1972. I don't know if anyone else would have cared.
Yeah.
Which is a sad commentary on things. But yeah, I feel like if it weren't Brando who was the name, and there weren't this controversy around it, the only thing we really have is this sexually explicit content, which
Sure.
Kale did. I think the reason she was so big on this movie was that it was one of the first like mainstream, or I guess high profile, a film featuring a high profile actor to show non-conventional sex, like down and dirty, kind of like not safe.
Like, it's not love sex, it's just sex.
Right. And it's yeah. So I don't know. You've got the trifecta. You've got Brando, the controversy, and then the explicit nature of the film. You take two of those things out, I don't know if it can stand on just one pillar.
Yeah.
So I think you bring up a good question.
Interestingly, I mean, Bertolucci kind of loosely based this on his own sexual fantasy, and I feel like the character that plays the character of her fiance seems like loosely based off of Bertolucci.
Which, especially after having seen Being Maria, I can totally understand that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing is, like, Last Tango, I don't know if again, it's the time capsule thing. I don't know if I'd seen it at the time, maybe I would have been swept up in it, but watching it now, I feel maybe I'm just too jaded, but I just don't think it's a very good or interesting movie. I don't think the sex is that hot. I think it's kind of gross, and maybe some people are like, well, sex is really, can be gross. I'm like, sure, it can be, but it can also be lovely and actually mean something.
I,
Um,
yeah,
I
I mean,
don't get anything from this movie except now I can say that I saw it.
sure, and I can understand like its kind of notoriety and importance because of what it is and when it came out. But yeah, I mean, to me, there's it. Yes, I'm going to use this word. There's nothing titillating about it. Um, but although we, yeah, do see do see her topless quite often, but there's nothing titillating about it because Brando's character. This is what I mean by Brandoism is he's really just he's so detached that it's hard for us to be attached to not just I mean it's easy to watch him because he's a good actor. He's a great actor. But in this role, it's hard to really get invested in him as Paul and Paul engaging with Jeanne. There's just to me there's obviously there's such a lack of chemistry and he is so detached from any reality really because supposedly because he's drifting into this kind of catatonic grief of his wife's suicide. But I also think that there's undeniably at this point Brando's one of those actors where you see Brando first before you see a character.
Yeah, and in the case of Being Maria, I saw Matt Dillon being Brando being Brando.
I have to say I was pretty impressive.
I was too, but it's that kind of thing where I think you hit the nail on the head. It's Brando just kind of like doing the Brando thing instead of playing a character. And I think that might be another thing I'm responding to is in 72 to see him not playing a character, but being the Brando I saw in Last Tango in Paris is the Brando that I saw in talk shows for the last 20 years of his
Yeah,
life,
yeah,
right? Not acting, just kind of like sitting there, like shelling peanuts or whatever he was doing, like talking about, ethereal nonsense and not really participating in the interview. Whereas this wasn't a move. This was not Don Corleone, you
right.
know, this was something else, but I'm like, yeah, it's just Brando being Brando. There's nothing interesting about it for me. Now, cast my mind back half a century where this like it'd almost be like watching Tom Cruise, like what is he like in real life, seeing that for the first time on screen rather than the persona, if there is any kind of difference.
But there's certain actors who are just like that. Their movie star status is so big that it's hard for them to disappear into roles. I mean, when Tom Hanks played Sully, you still see freaking Tom Hanks. I
Yeah.
mean, he still did a good job and everything, but it's like, you know, um, I know sometimes, we see Hanks. He does have the ability to disappear in roles. Like the last couple of Wes Anderson movies or something like where he's playing a supporting character. But here, Brando, he's larger than life, not as physically large as he would eventually get. He's it's interesting because maybe this might be the role that's closest to who he was at the time. I don't know, but it really didn't feel like a lot of times it didn't really feel it like acting. It felt like just us following Brando, almost like a documentary.
And that, I think that goes along with, I don't know what the script was like, but
Right.
Bertolucci's insistence on capturing, the reality of these characters. I wonder if he just kind of let the camera roll and said, okay, Marlon, just talk.
Well,
And
yeah,
we'll cut stuff together to make it kind of make sense or not.
yeah. I mean, the cinematographer for this movie also shot um, Apocalypse Now,
Mm.
and I couldn't help but think of Apocalypse Now while watching this. Vittorio Storaro, no, Storaro. Um, because in that, and we only really see Brando and Apocalypse Now in like it's a long movie in the last third act. Um,
He's the great white whale. Yeah.
exactly. And there's a lot of ramblings of Brando in that movie. There's just like the camera's focused on him and it's kind of rambling. And I feel like there's a little bit of that here too, where he's just kind of going off on, tirades against religion and, conformity and capitalism or whatever. And, there's a one scene where the, the anal intrusion is kind of reversed where she's behind him and he's up against, like, I guess what we seem to be like a window or a doorway, and he's like,
Oh, he's yeah.
clip your fingernails and stick them up my bum or whatever. And then he starts talking about, like, I want you to have sex with a dirty pig and this and that, and I'm to me, I'm like, this could be improv right now. I mean, this could be, and to me, it was almost like it was hard to take seriously, like, because I'm like, what are we doing here? and even the way the way it was performed was just, it was just really weird, and kind of par for the course as far as just like really kind of out there moments. But I would say all of the out there moments in the movie involve Brando. When he like kind of really kind of loses it. He's drunk in the ballroom and he kind of loses it when they're about to leave. They walk across the dance floor. All these other couples are competing in a tango contest, and he just kind of basically makes a mockery of the contest, not purposely. He's just lost in his own drunken stupor, and she goes along with it initially, and then he just winds up rolling around on the floor and eventually mooning one of the judges, and it's just it's hard to take seriously, because I think there's a deeper story here of, like, there's an interesting story that isn't really developed or really studied here, is this grief of, I think there's also, and we get it a little bit in that scene with when he visits his dead wife. I think he's kind of racked with guilt that maybe he wasn't the person that he wished he would have been with his wife, but there's a lot of conjecture there.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating thing, is I don't consider Last Tango in Paris to be a real movie. I feel like it's sort of an event, or it's the structure of a movie wrapped up around to use your word, titillating series of scenes that are meant to shock people. But I mean, if you think about what they could have done thematically with this thing, you've got the end of one marriage by suicide at the same time that in the course of a week, you're supposed to be celebrating, allegedly, the start of a new marriage with Maria and her, Jeanne and her fiance. What's that about? If they had talked about something deeper and not just been, a sexual encounter in that apartment, they could have really talked about, like, he's twice her age.
Yeah.
And he's learned some stuff about relationships. Maybe she's having second thoughts, but he tries to counsel her on, like, well, it's going to be okay. Or maybe you're making a mistake or whatever. Maybe she helps him to realize something about, his relationship. I would love to see what I'm going to call a real version of this movie.
Yeah. Like, instead of a male sexual fantasy movie, it could have been very interesting. Like, when they first meet, she's like, yeah, my fiance's got me out here looking for apartments for us. And it could have been interesting, like that. Maybe it would click something in him saying, oh, I remember when my wife and I looked for apartments, and, I actually just lost her and we were living in a hotel together that she ran. And please tell me about your husband. Tell me about your relationship. And, they could have made that pact, like, let's meet here for 3 days or whatever, Um,
Imagine, imagine this is like the Lost in translation, like
yeah,
Lost,
or like
Lost Tango in translation. I don't know.
like a Sofia Coppola movie or a Linklater movie.
There you go.
It would have been interesting. But it's just really provocative for a male sexual fantasy. Uh, you know,
And I think that's a good way to segue into Being Maria.
mhm.
Um, because one of the struggles that Maria Schneider faced after this film was she did get other film offers, but they were all for, hey, you're going to be naked throughout most of this movie, or hey, as is dramatized in a later film she did. There's a scene where she's in a bathroom with her, husband who's getting out of the shower and she's brushing her teeth, and the director's like, okay, we're going to do another take. I want you to take off that shirt so we could see the goods, and she's like, but I'm just brushing my teeth, and
Right.
she's like, the director's like, yeah, but your boyfriend's coming out of the shower. And she's like, yeah, I'm just in the bathroom. I'm brushing my teeth in the nude. What do you want here? Now, the story of Being Maria it's a very choppy film.
Mhm.
I'm going to say worse made than Last Tango in Paris. I watched the Kino Blu-ray and I thought there was a problem with the disc because the director, Jessica Palud, decides to do these very harsh cuts
Cut.
to black between key scenes, but the cuts to black last like 1 second too long to the point where you're like, wait a second,
There's something
is there a
wrong here.
malfunction with the disc? And there's a time jump. So I'm like, wait, did I miss an entire chapter or scene or scenes? What's going on here? Time is funny in this movie. At the beginning of the film, someone asks her age and she says 16. And then 5 minutes later, she's talking about her age. She said, oh, I'm 19. So I'm like, okay, did we have a 3-year time jump? Is she lying about her age? Because later on in the film, we lose entire years between moments with no visible change to the character. I'm like, wait a second. She's been on heroin for 7 years. She just got on drugs like
Right.
10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is like a kind of like a skip here, speed up, skip here, speed up. Um, Kind of storyline. And it is a little choppy. I was mostly, as far as I do like the main performance by Anamaria Vartolomei. Wow. Um, and she plays Maria Schneider, and for the brief amount of time he's on the screen, I did like Dillon as Brando. Mostly because I'm like, he's doing it. I mean, who would want to play Brando? But he's doing it.
And
Uh,
he does a very good job,
yeah,
but I think part of it is because he's playing a character who wasn't playing a character, it's hard to see him other than
right,
doing like, oh, he's doing a bunch of Brandoisms.
right,
Um, and that's the other thing. This movie is almost a bait and switch because I feel like Dillon is in the movie for about 15 minutes of its hour and 40-minute runtime. And when you're kind of lured in, especially because he's on the DVD cover and everything with the Maria and the Bertolucci characters, you're like, oh, this is about the making of this movie and the controversy.
right.
It's mostly about the aftermath.
Yeah,
And something that I had forgotten about, and I'm embarrassed, but I would have loved to have seen how they dealt with the finger up the butt scene that you mentioned, because that happens, I believe, later in the film after the butter scene. It's almost like a reverse kind of penetration angle. So how did Maria Schneider deal with that scene? Was that another improv? Could she have seen that as a way of getting revenge on Brando? Like, how do you like this, pal? It's not butter, and I didn't bother to clip my nails.
yeah. Oh man, woo! Watch the hemorrhoids. And in Last Tango in Paradise, I watched it with subtitles, English and the French naturally come up. But Brando's character Paul mentions hemorrhoids like 3 times. Side note, but anyway, I'm like, what? So yeah, I mean, I think overall, like I said, I do like the central performances, but I did feel coming out of Being Maria is that there's got to be more to her than just this.
And
And
There is so much more. Now, before we get off onto that, and unfortunately, we're going to give the balance of this review is going to Last Tango in Paris, but we're kind of talking about Being Maria as well. Um, the just the story, it feels, it feels like something that was conceived of during the Me Too movement, but it came out a couple years too late
Mm.
because I feel like I've seen this movie half a dozen times at least. I feel like I've read the story, not in this specific context, but versions of it, 20 times in the last 10 years. And it's unfortunate because I think it's a story that deserves to be told, but also it falls into that druggy biopic thing where it's like, okay, she goes through this thing, her career is a disaster. So naturally, she turns to heroin. And then she meets up with a college student who wants to write her thesis on her. And all of a sudden, she's bisexual. And, she's in a relationship with this girl. They go to sleep, they go to bed for one night. The next morning, she's like, oh, by the way, I'm a heroin junkie. Do you have a problem with that? And she's like, no. And then, of course, that leads to a destructive relationship with the withdrawal and an ODing in the club. And then we cut away to years later. We don't know what happened in that relationship, but she's in a suite doing press for a new movie. And, I'm jumping ahead to full spoilers, but it turns out Bertolucci is in the next suite doing press for his film. And I won't say what the result of that is, but I feel like the last scene of the film is the most interesting in terms of the character of Maria. And I feel like this is where the movie should be ramping up instead of the predictable cut to black.
Yeah, I mean, I would have really liked. I know that she did the Passenger with Jack Nicholson. They briefly mentioned that,
Yeah.
and I know that she's said to in interviews she's said to have had a really good experience on that film. So, isn't that part of Being Maria? Is let's see maybe that she had some good acting experiences after that. Yes, she was stereotyped and that she was given all these, kind of, let's say scandalous character roles after that she turned down or whatever. But like there's got to be more to her than just this experience that she had on this set and how it impacted her. Um, yes, it was a huge thing that happened in her life, but I would think that the goal of Being Maria, and it was based on a book that was written by her cousin, Vanessa Schneider. I would think that the book or that the goal here is to show more of who this person really was.
Um, yeah. I mentioned Wikipedia and IMDb, and I went up and I looked some facts about this stuff.
Sure.
And Maria Schneider later in her life became a huge advocate for women in, I guess, the European entertainment industry in terms of lobbying on behalf of like female directors.
Yeah.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is a real missed opportunity and could have been a framing device for this film, is you find out reading the IMDb, Jessica Palud was 19 years old and a production assistant, her first big break on 2003's The Dreamers, which not only gave us Eva Green, thank you, but is also was directed by Bernardo Bertolucci, who
Yep.
she kind of idolized and followed around. And she says in this like really fascinating quote, she's like, I saw some of the behavior that he had been known for, but I also experienced the kind of power that came from being on the other side of the, the other side of the talent. And so she kind of brought some of that, I guess, into this story, like exploring Maria Schneider's story later on. I'm like, imagine that as the
Hmm.
kind of the framing device and these kind of like parallel journeys of these people making this movie with this crazy director. Instead, we get none of that. We get these flashes of scenes from Maria Schneider's life without actually knowing anything about her. I mean, apparently she was an actress before the Last Tango in Paris. She had some bit parts. Her
Yeah.
father was an actor.
Right.
Her mom kicked her out of the apartment when she started hanging out with her dad. Like there's like 6 hours worth of movie in here that we never get to see.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was really I like the idea of how it establishes is kind of right away that how her parents impacted her and affected her. So you have that going into this role that she's taking, and how, in conversations that she's having with her father and his friends, his actor, filmmaker friends, all they're really kind of, a lot of them are like, you got a role in a Marlon Brando movie, and it's like, that's basically what they're insinuating in not so many words. And I can imagine how even the dad seemed like, huh, wow, I can't believe this, and I can imagine how that would be, quite, how it could be quite hurtful for someone. It's like, yes, I auditioned for the role and I was chosen, I mean,
But I think there's another layer to that, because that scene where she's meeting with the family and friends,
mhm,
and it's also the touched on in the dialogue, but again, it's another dynamic that you could have made an entire movie about this. The family and friends are her father's friends and
right,
his new family, including his young children that he had with the woman who's not Maria's mother.
that's right,
I believe the product of an affair, or at least the relationship was. So a lot of cool stuff. When I say cool, I mean really dark things going on there. But the attitude towards Maria getting that part of it was like, yeah, to your point, I think, like, who are you? But also a couple of people mentioned like, oh yeah, that script has been going around, and
everybody
yeah,
turned it down.
well,
Yeah,
but also it's like the idea, I think, insinuated that Brando the movie is all about Brando going to an apartment and having sex with a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old, and they picked you. It's not necessarily your talents that, got you the role, right?
right,
It's you could just, and I think this speaks to her reputation after the film, because the role of Jeanne in that movie, there's not really any meat to it. She is the vessel that kind of witnesses and is affected by Brando's madness. We get more of a character in Maria in this movie than we did of Jeanne in Last Tango in Paris, which I think is a credit to that
which,
lead performance.
yeah,
Um,
which we should,
yeah,
makes sense.
right. So yeah, it's unfortunate, because I think the scenes that we do get in this movie are interesting, but they feel like they were clipped out of a 10-hour miniseries about this person's life. And I don't get much reading the highlight reel. And it's a sad state of affairs when I'm reading Wikipedia and IMDb and putting together in my head a strong narrative with like framing devices that I didn't get from this hour and 40-minute
Right.
movie.
Yeah, I mean, I could see how a story like this could have, easily been, stretched out into, 3 or 4 episodes or something like that. But yeah, it did feel like there was more to tell. Um, all these little kind of nuggets that were either briefly mentioned or briefly um, filmed. It's just kind of like, it, there seems to be a lot more on the subjects of, childhood trauma, or father daughter tension, or definitely mother daughter tension. Her mother kicked her out of her apartment. Um, so a lot of those things could have been could have really fleshed out, like how, Maria Schneider was a very multidimensional person. You know, but here, yes, you get a little bit more than the character of Jeanne, but not, not all that much, but a little bit more.
Right. And it's, the last scene of the film, which I mentioned, that kind of the interview, there's another time jump. I mean, we see Maria and her girlfriend Noor sitting outside under a tree in the dark in this cabin, where after Maria overdoses at a club, Noor takes her out there to, I guess, kind of get clean, and she's on methadone and she's having withdrawals, and they have this huge fight, and Maria beats the crap out of Noor in the bathroom looking for a fix, but they kind of reconcile under this tree, and then cut to this bright suite where she's wrapping up an interview. I don't know, a decade later, she's off the drugs. She's like
Yeah,
put together, well established, well adjusted adult, as far as we can tell. No, really, what happened in that 5-10 year period that
yeah.
we missed? Like, that's,
Where's
yeah.
Nor?
Where's Nor? Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, so I mean, in a way, um, I'm kind of, I'm glad something like this is out there, because it it's kind of interesting to see something like this explored. I just wish there was, and I just wish there was more to it, because there
Yeah.
definitely seems like there could be more to explore here.
There really is, and I think, unfortunately, because this was the kind of the first movie, to my knowledge, out of the gate, we're gonna have to wait another probably 10 years before someone decides, "Hey, I wanna make a movie about, what happened to Maria Schneider," because someone else can be like, "Yeah, they made that movie."
Yeah,
Or maybe exploit it as a miniseries, kinda like what we're talking about, because there is a lot here, and I'm grateful that you recommended that we talk about these films, because this is kind of an aspect of cinema that I had not been familiar with, but it's frustrating because I'm like, we have 2 pieces of art here, and I'm coming away from both with this kind of empty, disappointed feeling.
yeah, yeah. Um, I'm glad we, finally caught up with, Bertolucci's, kind of landmark controversial film, and that we saw Being Maria. You know, I think both of them had some diminishing returns, for
Yeah.
sure. Um, but still, both of them had some good acting. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's that. Now, listen to this.
Uh-oh.
Movie star Marlon Brando recruits a Los Angeles architect to build the world's first ecologically perfect retreat on a small uninhabited island in Tahiti. That is the description of a movie coming out in September called Waltzing with Brando, where you have Billy Zane as Brando. And it also stars Richard Dreyfuss, John Heder, Tia Carrera, Rob Corddry. What?
Is this a comedy or a drama, or it
I'm
sounds
sure.
absurd?
I'm sure you can easily respond to that question with yes. Uh, yeah. From the director of Car 54, Where Are You? And Tapehead.
No. No.
Uh,
Oh my gosh, this the year of the dueling Brandos. It's ironic because Jessica Palud, one of her previous films was called Marlon. No
I know,
relation.
right?
Yeah. But
So fascinating.
yeah.
There's definitely, plenty of Brando films that I have to catch up on and stuff. But I did want to check this box and finally see this, and I'm glad I did. And I think there's maybe 1, 2, 3 really outstanding scenes with Brando in this movie, and I did like his scene in the balcony at the end. I thought that there was something kind of poetic and artful about it.
Well,
Yeah,
and Jeanne had and I think Maria Schneider did a good performance in that last scene where she's kind of like
she does. She really does.
getting her story together as
Yeah,
far as what happened
and
there.
and that was kind
Um,
of a cool way to end it.
here's
Um,
here's the common thread, David. Both of these kind of problematic, I'm not going to say mediocre because that's way too harsh, but
yeah,
unsatisfying movies had outstanding endings,
yeah,
outstanding final scenes.
which is very rare. Usually they start out great and kind of peter off, but yeah, they both have good endings. Yeah, I was pretty impressed with the way it ended, because I'm like, okay, this, there was an introduction in Last Tango early on between her mother and her, of a gun, a weapon, and I'm like, okay, is that going to play out later on? Somehow, and sure enough. But I do like the touch, and Ebert brings this up in one of his reviews. In fact, I think Cale does too, maybe. Like, the whole this had to be something that Brando came up with, but the whole taking his gum out and putting it on the railing of the balcony, kind of like you would underneath a theater seat. Um, that was just kind of, it was a very purposeful thing, a very characteristic thing that, like, an actor would do.
But you kind of, but you have to set up for that shot, right? So I wonder if it's something that he did, and Bertolucci's like, wait, what the hell did he just? Wait, we got to go back and do that again because that
Because
was awesome.
they must have, yeah, they must have talked about it. It's not just improv, because the camera sits on it.
Right.
So yeah, I was expecting him to like, fall off the balcony. But
Well, yeah, he didn't.
yeah, he did.
All right. Well, I think it's time for us to take a bow on the balcony, not like Brando did in that movie, but yeah, we're gonna get out of here. And this has been it's been a great little dance we've done tonight, David. I
Yes,
appreciate it.
yes. And it might be our last.
Wait, what? No. Okay, good. I don't want to. Oh, we're not breaking news. You're okay, right?
I'm all right.
All right. All right. Well, David Fowley of Keeping It Real, thanks again for hanging out and for recommending a movie. This is good. We're getting into this rapport of like not fighting over movies anymore. I wonder if people are going to be disappointed. But anyway, folks out there, if you enjoyed this show, please like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Check out David's work at Keeping It Real. It's all links are down below. And I'm going to link to the Pauline Kael review, and I'll even dig up the Ebert one and post it there because it's a fascinating read. Even if I don't agree with it, I always love reading their stuff.
I will say what's interesting about Ebert is he reviewed the movie in 72, 95, and I think 2011 maybe.
Wow.
For his great movies. Yeah, so it's very interesting to see what he says. In fact, 2004, sorry. And in one of those interviews, he was like, and not so many words, I think he was basically like, he basically said he was wrong about something, which is not unlike him, but it's kind of cool to see.
I know he did a turnaround on Clockwork Orange, which I heard him talk about at one of his book signings years ago. But yeah. All right. Well, everybody out there, thank you very much for hanging out. If you like the show, please like, subscribe, and ring the bells and all that good stuff. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever it is, thanks very much and take care. Hey everyone, Ian here. I know, long time no see. But if you like the video you just watched, feel free to subscribe to Kicking the Seat right here. And also check out the playlist and recommended video right here. Thanks for watching.